By the time I realized the orange tape was wrong, the trail behind me had already disappeared, not like it vanished in a magic trick, but in the plain way the woods can erase you when you stop trusting your own direction. It was 2019. I was hiking alone in Michigan's Porcupine Mountains Wilderness State Park, trying to beat the early dark back to my car before the temperature dropped and the park went quiet in that way big northern forests do. A few minutes earlier, I'd heard a short whistle from the trees, then a voice that sounded official, calm and practiced, telling me to take the marked detour because search crews needed the main path clear. The voice wasn't yelling, wasn't panicked, and that mattered because calm voices make you feel childish for questioning them. I didn't know yet that the calm was the whole point. At the time, I was 34. I'd always been the kind of guy who could walk off stress if you gave me enough miles, and I'd been carrying more stress than I wanted to admit. I wasn't falling apart, nothing dramatic like that, but I wasn't sleeping well, and I was spending too much money in town trying to distract myself. Gas station coffee, late dinners, small purchases that felt like relief for about 5 minutes. Hiking was cheaper than my other habits, and it left me tired in a way that usually brought real sleep. The Upper Peninsula felt like a clean choice, the kind of place where the air makes your lungs work and your mind shut up. Porcupine Mountains, the Porkies, had been on my list for years. Big woods, cold air, and if you picked the right weekday, no crowds. I drove up before sunrise and rolled into the Union Bay side lot a little after 9 a.m. The sky was flat and pale, that winter leftover light you still get in spring up there, even when the calendar says it's almost summer. It makes everything look closer than it is. The lake was a dull sheet behind the trees, and the wind off Superior had that damp bite that crawls through a jacket if you stand still. There were only 2 other vehicles. One was a dented blue minivan with a child's bike rack, the kind of rack that tells you a family planned a whole day and brought extra straps just in case. The other was an older pickup with a canopy, clean enough to look cared for, but old enough to have earned its scratches. A man and a teenage boy stood by the minivan, tightening bootlaces and shifting packs around like they were still negotiating what was necessary. The boy had a bright red knit cap pulled low and a pack that looked too new, the kind of pack someone buys to start fresh at something. The father gave me a polite nod that didn't ask for conversation, but didn't shut it down either. When I walked past, he asked, "You heading up to the escarpment?" Like it was the normal question you ask at trailheads when you want to place someone without being nosy. I said I was thinking about doing a loop if the trails were clear. He smiled like he was trying to keep things simple for the kid. "We're doing Lake of the Clouds," he said. "Short day. He's got school tomorrow." The boy rolled his eyes, but it wasn't angry, just the kind of reflex teenagers have when their parents say anything about responsibility. I went to the trail register box and found a fresh sheet clipped inside. I wrote my first name and the time. I hesitated over the route line because I've always been the kind of guy who thinks a plan is useful until it isn't, and then it's just ink trapping you into stupid decisions. Still, I wrote the loop I planned, something that would take me toward the escarpment and back without getting too far from established routes. When I stood up, I saw another guy near the start of the path. He wore a reflective vest over a hoodie. He wasn't dressed like a ranger. No uniform, no patch, no badge, nothing that would hold up under a second look. But the vest was bright enough to catch your brain, and he held a handheld radio in one hand like it belonged there. "Morning," he said, casual, like we'd already met once before. "Morning," I answered, and I could feel my mind doing what it always does around authority signals, taking shortcuts. He glanced at the register, then at my car, like he was tracking pieces in his head. "Main path's getting work today," he said. "Search teams, missing hikers from last week. If you see orange tape, follow it. Keeps you out of their grid." That stopped me. I still had my pen in my hand. "Missing hikers?" I asked, and I hate admitting it, but my tone was more curious than concerned, like it was a local headline I'd missed. He lifted his shoulders like it wasn't his problem. "Couple folks didn't come out," he said. "It happens. Stay on what's marked." The father by the minivan had heard him, and I saw the change in his posture, that protective stiffening parents do when the world stops feeling like a controlled environment. "Are you saying the trail's closed?" the father asked. The man in the vest shook his head. "Not closed," he said. "Just routed. You'll see it." Then he turned away like the conversation was over, like he'd delivered a message and that was his whole job. I remember thinking it was odd he didn't tell us to check in with the park office. He didn't ask for our names. He didn't give his. Still, the vest and the radio did what they were meant to do. They made me lower my guard, and they made the father think twice without knowing what to do with the thought. The father and son headed out first. I watched them disappear into the trees, the red knit cap flashing between trunks for a few seconds, then gone. I told myself I'd keep a little distance and let them have their pace. Then I started behind them. The first mile felt normal, and normal is dangerous because it makes you think you're safe. Leaf litter over hard ground, cold air in my throat, my breath light and steady. I kept my pace consistent and didn't try to catch the pair ahead. But every so often I'd see a hint of that red cap through the trees, and it kept the trail feeling inhabited. The path was clear, the kind of maintained route that lets you stop thinking about your feet and start thinking about whatever you came to escape. I listened to birds, to the low hush that never fully leaves a forest like that. And I tried to tell myself this was the reset I'd driven for. About 40 minutes in, I saw the first strip of orange tape tied around a low branch, new and bright, like it had been put up that morning. A little farther there was more, 2 strips this time, angled left where the main path kept going straight. I stopped at the junction and looked at the dirt, because dirt tells the truth more often than people do. The main path had boot prints, several sets, with the usual crushed leaves and scuffed patches. The left turn had prints too, but fewer, and they looked fresher, like the edges hadn't softened yet. The tape itself didn't look like the thicker, branded kind I'd seen on official closures in other parks. It looked like hardware store tape, the kind you can buy in a roll for a few dollars. I stood there long enough that my fingers started to sting from the cold. Then I heard movement off to my right. Not an animal sound, not a branch snapping, just that subtle shift like someone changing weight on leaves. I turned and saw nothing clear, just trunks, brush, and the suggestion of depth. I told myself it was probably the father and son, maybe stepping off to adjust straps or take a break. I let that assumption do the work of proof. Then I took the left turn. The detour narrowed fast. It felt like an old cut-through that had grown back in. Brush hit my pant legs. Wet leaves grabbed at my boots. The ground was uneven in the way that makes you pay attention again, and I remember being annoyed, because annoyance is what you feel when your brain doesn't want to admit fear yet. I kept seeing orange tape every few minutes, always ahead, always just enough to pull me forward, like breadcrumbs laid by someone who understood how people follow markers. I told myself it was temporary, that it would reconnect with the main route soon, and that the park wouldn't send hikers into something unsafe. I told myself that because I wanted to keep believing the signals meant something. After another 10 minutes, the woods opened into a small clearing, and the first thing I noticed was the wrongness of objects where they shouldn't be. Backpacks hung from a low branch, straps looped like someone had displayed them. 3 of them at least, maybe 4, because one was half hidden behind the trunk. One was a kid's pack, small and blue, with a cheap keychain dangling from the zipper. My stomach tightened in a way that didn't feel like nerves, more like my body recognized a pattern before my mind could label it. A phone buzzed inside one of the pockets. The screen lit up with missed calls and a name I couldn't read from where I stood. Then went dark again, then buzzed again like it was refusing to accept silence. I stepped closer anyway, slow, because I didn't know what else to do. On the ground, half covered in leaves, was a red knit cap, the same bright red as the boys at the trailhead. I didn't have to hold it up to know. Color sticks in your mind when it's attached to a person you've seen alive. I pulled my own phone out. No service, just blank bars and that little empty feeling you get when the device in your hand turns into dead weight. That's when I noticed the camera. It was strapped to a cedar at chest height with a black strap, lens facing the clearing and the tape line that led into it. It wasn't hidden well. It didn't need to be. It sat there like a fact. I backed up one step, then another, and I felt that urge to run. But running makes noise. Running makes you fall. Running tells whoever's watching that you've recognized the game. I tried to breathe quietly and look normal, like I was just a confused hiker who would wander back out without making trouble. Behind me, a voice came from the brush, calm and close. "Hey," it said, "don't touch that stuff." I I turned, and there he was, the man from the trailhead, walking toward me through the brush with steady steps, not rushing, not cautious, like he knew exactly where the ground was solid. The handheld radio was in his hand. His other hand stayed low, partly hidden by his body. "You're on the wrong line," he said. "Come on back with me." My mouth went dry. "Those packs," I said, and I hated how thin my voice sounded. "That's a kid's hat." He tilted his head like he was listening to a complaint at a service counter. "Search team staged gear," he said. "They don't want hikers messing it up." I stared at him because the lie was too clean. "That's not staged," I said. "That's someone's stuff." He took one more step closer, and then he said my first name. Not like a question, not like a guess, just my name, flat and certain. In that instant, a dozen small details snapped into place. The register sheet, his glance at it, the way he'd looked at my car, the way the tape had led me exactly where the camera could see. My legs moved before my brain finished the thought. I turned to go back the way I'd come, and my ankle hit something tight and low. A cord caught my foot and yanked. I went down hard, hands and chest in wet leaves. Pain shot up my shin, and I tasted dirt because my face hit the ground hard enough to drive grit past my lips. I rolled onto my back and saw the cord stretched nearly invisible between two roots, thin enough to miss unless you were looking for it, tight enough to do its job. The man stood over me, still calm. "Easy," he said. "I don't want to make this messy." I kicked at the cord, trying to free my ankle. He crouched and grabbed my boot like he was about to help, and that almost got me, because your brain wants to interpret hands reaching as assistance. I swung my trekking pole hard and caught his forearm. He jerked back with a sharp breath, more surprised than hurt. I ripped my foot free and scrambled up, and I didn't run well because my ankle felt wrong, like it wanted to fold. I limped through brush, following the orange tape backward because it was the only line I had, and behind me I heard him move faster now, not crashing, not careless, close enough that I knew if I fell again, it would be over. I forced myself not to scream. I forced myself not to waste breath on panic sounds. I aimed for where I thought the main trail should be, trying to read the forest the way you read a crowded room, looking for the spaces that seemed walked on, the slight flattening in leaf litter, the subtle openings between trunks. The tape kept flashing in my peripheral vision, and I hated it because it felt like following his hand even when I was trying to escape it. When I finally burst onto a wider path, I almost cried from relief. Boot prints, a clear line, a real trail. I turned left toward what I thought was the direction of the lot, and 20 yards later I saw orange tape again, tied at eye level this time, forming a crude X across the path. Not official, no signage, no explanation, just a barrier that looked like a warning and a dare. It was the first moment I understood what he was doing with the tape. It wasn't just to guide you in. It was to keep you from going back out the easy way once you were in. Behind me, his voice carried again, steady, almost patient. "Wrong way," he called. "Search work." I didn't answer. I looked right and saw the slope down toward the lake basin. Thick brush and uneven ground, but open enough that it didn't feel like a funnel. I went down. I slid more than I walked, grabbing branches to slow myself, leaves slick under my boots, my ankle flaring with each drop. I could hear my own breathing loud in my ears. I could hear nothing else, and that silence was worse than footsteps because it meant he could be moving without revealing himself. Halfway down, I saw something that stopped me cold. A man sat on the ground behind a fallen log, hands bound in front of him with cord. His face was gray with cold and fear. It was the father from the lot. Seeing him there made the situation real in a way nothing else had, because it turned my fear into a confirmed pattern. His mouth moved before I even reached him. "He took my boy," he said. I crouched and grabbed at the cord around his wrists. The knots were tight and clean, the kind of knot you tie when you've practiced on something that doesn't fight back. "What happened?" I asked, and my hands shook enough that I couldn't get a good grip. "We were on the trail," he said. "He came up behind us, reflective vest, radio. Said he was with search people, said they needed the main path clear. He talked to me like I was in his way. Then he told my kid to stay close because the ground was rough. I looked down to adjust my strap. 1 second. When I looked up, my son was gone." The father swallowed hard and blinked like his eyes were dry. "I ran back," he said. "I found the packs. I yelled his name. Then something hit my leg. I woke up like this." He glanced past me toward the trees, like he was afraid to look for too long in one direction. "He's close," he whispered. The words were barely out before a voice came from above us on the slope. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't a threat. It sounded like someone correcting a mistake. "Step away from him," the man said. I looked up and saw him standing where the grade leveled for a moment, handgun pointed down, arm steady like this was an action he'd rehearsed. The reflective vest was gone. The radio was clipped to his belt now, like a tool put away after use. The father tried to stand, but the cord kept him pinned in that helpless half-sit. "Please," the father said, and there was no anger left in his voice. "My kid." The man's eyes didn't move. The gun stayed on us. "You shouldn't have come down here," he said to me, like I'd broken a rule he'd posted somewhere. I stood slowly, hands half raised, trying to look compliant while my mind searched for angles, distance, anything. "You said search crews," I said. "You lied." He took a careful step down. "I told you to follow the tape," he said. "You didn't." The father made a small sound, not a sob, more like air leaking out. I shifted my weight like I might obey, and my hand tightened around my trekking pole because it was the only thing I had that could reach him. His eyes flicked to it. He fired once. The sound slapped through the trees, sharp and final. The father collapsed backward behind the log like his body had simply quit. There was no dramatic spray, no movie noise beyond that single crack, just the sudden absence of a man who'd been talking a second earlier. I froze, because your brain stalls when it watches a line get crossed. The man's gun swung toward me. I turned and ran downhill, ankles screaming, mind narrowed to one thought that felt like a command. Get to a road, get to a person, stay alive. I slid and stumbled until the slope eased and the brush thinned into a rough service track, a wide strip where the dirt looked packed and the trees stood farther apart. It wasn't a paved road, not even gravel, just a maintenance route, but seeing it felt like seeing civilization. I limped onto it and forced my legs to keep moving even as my breath went ragged and hot. I didn't look back until I hit a bend, and when I did, he was there, coming down behind me, not sprinting, not panicked, moving like he understood pacing. Like he knew time was on his side, and like he didn't need to hurry because he expected me to make mistakes. That steady pursuit was worse than a chase. It told me he'd done this before. Ahead, through the trees, I saw a white vehicle, boxy, the kind of shape you recognize as official, even if you can't read the logo. A park maintenance truck. A man stood by it with a tool bag, working near the rear, head down. I yelled and waved both arms, and my voice cracked because I'd been holding fear in my throat for too long. The worker turned, startled, then saw my face and the way I moved and the way my hands shook. "What happened?" he shouted. "Call 911, I said. "Now, there's a man on the trail. He shot someone." The worker's eyes went wide. He grabbed his phone and started dialing as he backed toward the truck, and I felt a surge of relief so strong it almost made me dizzy. I stumbled to the passenger side. He yanked the door open. "Get in," he said, and I climbed in and slammed it shut hard enough to rattle the frame. Through the windshield, I saw the man step onto the track behind us, far enough back that he could still pretend he belonged there if someone glanced without thinking. He raised his hand in a casual gesture, like he was going to ask for help, like he was the one who'd been wronged. The maintenance worker didn't hesitate. He dropped the phone onto the seat for half a second, put the truck in gear, and hit the gas. We bounced down the track, tires spitting dirt, and I kept twisting to look back until the trees swallowed the man and the curve hit him. We reached the park office area with the truck parked crooked and the worker running inside with his phone pressed to his ear again. I sat in the passenger seat, shaking, trying to keep my ankle still, feeling the pulse of pain and the delayed shock, the way your body starts counting injuries once it thinks it might live. A ranger came out within minutes, then another. Their faces had that quick focus look people get when they shift from routine to emergency. They asked me questions in short bursts. Where exactly? What time? What did he look like? Did he say a name? Did I see a vehicle? I gave short answers because long answers felt like they might fall apart. I pointed on a map with a trembling finger, and I watched them note it without drama, which somehow made it feel more serious. They didn't waste time. They called in deputies from the county. They called in more park staff. Radios crackled. A couple of people jogged to gear lockers. Someone offered me water and I didn't drink it because my stomach was too tight. I remember noticing small details because that's what my brain does when it can't hold the big picture. A clipboard with laminated emergency procedures, a scuffed bench by the door, the smell of wet jackets. They kept me in the office area, not because they were comforting me, but because I was a witness and they needed me contained, and I understood that even then. By late afternoon, teams moved out on the trails in pairs, some with flashlights already, some with radios, some with that measured step you get when you're approaching something you don't want to rush into. I stayed because I couldn't imagine driving away with the father's face in my head. I stayed because I'd seen the kid's cap, and once you see a personal object like that in the dirt, it becomes a responsibility whether you asked for it or not. A deputy took my statement again, slower this time, writing it down in a way that made my story feel like evidence instead of memory. He asked if I was sure about the gun. I said yes. He asked if I was sure about the boy's cap. I said yes. He asked if I could identify the man if I saw him again. I said yes, and that was the first time I realized how calm the man's face had been the whole time. How that calm would make him hard to describe, because he hadn't given me any emotion to hang features on. Not long after 6 p.m., a call came in over one of the office radios, and even though I couldn't hear every word, I could hear the change in tone in the ranger's voice. They'd found the clearing. They'd found the backpacks. They'd found the father. The ranger looked at me with that careful neutrality professionals use when they don't want to trigger someone in front of them, and he said quietly, "They located the adult male." He didn't say dead. He didn't have to. A little later, they found a shallow pit covered with branches not far from the clearing, the kind of thing you might walk past if you weren't looking for disturbed ground. Inside was a boy's pack and the red knit cap. No boy. The absence hit harder than anything else, because a hat is light, a hat is easy to lose, and yet it was there in a place it shouldn't be, arranged like a message. They kept searching anyway. They spread out. They used lights. They called his name. The woods swallowed the sound without answering. Around 8 p.m., another call came in, shorter, tighter, like it had to be said cleanly. They had a suspect in custody near the lot. He'd come back for the orange tape. That detail stuck with me because it wasn't greed or panic that brought him back. It was maintenance, like taking down a sign after the job is done. When they walked him past the office, I saw him in the floodlights with his hands behind his back. His face was calm, not angry, not frightened, not even irritated. He looked like someone waiting for paperwork. A deputy guided him without drama, and the man didn't resist, which made my skin crawl more than if he'd fought, because it suggested he believed in his own control even then. A ranger opened a sealed evidence bag on a table inside and showed me what they'd pulled from the man's truck, and I understood in that moment how big the thing I'd stepped into really was. There was a binder with plastic sleeves, pages of first names, dates, trail notes, handwritten maps of parking lots with arrows and times, like someone tracking patterns, printed photos taken from a distance, parking lots, people lacing boots, people standing at registers, faces caught mid-motion. One photo was me at 9:12 a.m., pen in hand, head down, completely unaware. Seeing myself like that made my throat tighten. It wasn't just proof he'd watched me. It was proof that, to him, I was already a file before I became a person. They told me later, after midnight, that they did find the boy alive that night, not far from the pit, hidden under brush like someone had tried to erase him without going too far from the place the tape could lead back to. He was cold and terrified and couldn't explain much beyond fragments, but he was breathing, and that mattered. They also found other IDs in the man's camp, tucked in a dry bag like souvenirs, tied to missing reports that had been open for months in different counties. The scale of it was bigger than the park, bigger than one day, bigger than what I'd been able to imagine when I drove in that morning looking for quiet. A medic wrapped my ankle and told me not to be stubborn about it, which made me almost laugh, because stubbornness is what got me into the woods alone in the first place. They told me to go home. I left the park after midnight with a bandage on my leg and my own morning printed on a page in an evidence sleeve somewhere. On the drive south, every reflective marker on the road looked like a strip of orange tape in my headlights. I kept seeing that tape line fluttering in the wind, bright and confident, like it had been hung just for me, and I realized the worst part wasn't the fall or the pain or even the gunshot. The worst part was how easy it had been to make me follow a simple marker into the trees.